Okay, we're back for part 2 of our tutorial video for using Illustrator. Um, Part 1 is really just some basics with handling documents. Part 2 we're going to get into some of the specifics of this particular project, some specifics for drawing letters in Illustrator. So just a quick review. We have placed art of our first scan. This is on a layer. That layer is locked. I can toggle that invisibility. I have a checklist layer here, which of course you won't need to have, but this is just my checklist of what I'm going to show you guys. And then I have an art layer, and this is where we're going to actually draw the art. So let's just go right through our list. Those of you who have used Illustrator before, you may be familiar with the pen tool. The pen tool is it's the main way that you draw in Illustrator. It can be as simple as this, as just connecting dots and lines. However, it also allows you to adjust curves. And this is the part that a lot of people have trouble with at first. That Illustrator allows you to pull out handles from every point and adjust curves based on those handles. It is not the most intuitive way of drawing. If you are used to drawing with a pencil or a marker and paper, where you just form the line with your hand as you go, this can be a little bit difficult to learn. However, it is worth learning. Once you've learned it, you get a tremendous amount of control over your over the shapes of your lines. Unlike hand drawing, where you basically have to hit it right the first time or keep erasing and going back, Bezier curves allow you to endlessly tweak, which is one of the great benefits of digital design. So let's talk about the very basics of drawing with the pen tool. You have a pen tool. At its core, you just connect dots. There are open shapes, and there are closed paths. So on my left is an open shape, there's an open path. On the shape I'm going to draw on the right will be a closed path. In that, I'm going back to the point where I started, closing the shape. In Illustrator, you can have strokes and fills. You'll notice down here at the bottom of the toolbar, we have two color boxes. This one is fill, this one is stroke. You also have them up here, the fill and the stroke. And this is basically, the stroke is the outline color. So for this one, if I want to make my outline red, there we go. I make my stroke red. I'm going to make it thicker. And if I make my fill cyan, now, even though this is an open shape, you'll notice my stroke stops here and here because I did not close the shape. But if I add a fill, it just automatically fills in as if this is connected. It's like, it's like house painting when you decide, well, I'm just going to cut across a particular line that you decide. Well, the fill has to end somewhere, so it just decides that the line made by the two outside points is your fill line. If we apply the same color and treatment to our closed path, where I had a red stroke with 3 points of thickness, and I had a cyan fill. See, of course, the fill is on the inside of our closed path. It's like a coloring book. Now, suppose I want some curves in here. I have just drawn straight lines. I want some curves. We go back to our pen tools, hold down the mouse. You see we get all kinds of other tools here. The basic one is the pen tool. You can add anchor points. With this plus one, you can delete anchor points. With the minus one, and the convert anchor point tool, you'll see it's like a little open arrow. If you click on an anchor point with that tool, you can pull out curve handles. You may notice that one did this sort of weird loop-de-loop. Once you have curve handles, if you want to affect them directly, your basic selection tool selects the entire object. Alright, this is good for moving things around. Your direct selection tool will select individual points and move them, or individual handles and move them. Alright, now this is what's a little confusing for people at first. When you pull out a curve handles, it tends to keep the two handles, the left and right hand side of the point, at a tangent to the curve. So you move one side, the other side moves with it. Well, you don't always want your curve to be like that. That's good. That's a good default because it means you get these nice smooth curves. But sometimes you want a little pointiness in there, in which case you go back to, I'm going to undo because I didn't explain what I did. You go back to your convert anchor point tool and you grab one of the handles. Now you can either move that handle to where you want it to be, like that. So here, this corner is convex curve on this side and a concave curve on this side. The other thing you can do is you can just click the point that deletes the handles, or you can just click one handle that makes that side of the curve go away. So now this side of the curve is, this side of the point rather is a curve, and this side is flat. So this is really good when you want a straight line that transitions into a curve. There are two ways to draw with curves. One is like I just showed you, where you draw straight lines and then you convert the curves. The other is to, a little hard to explain what I'm doing. If I just click and click and click, it connects the dots, okay? If I click and hold down, I can pull out curve handles. And now the next point I pull out will have that curve handle applied. So this is a little bit harder to get a grasp on at first, but once you do, this is actually a very efficient way to draw with the pen tool. Okay, so those are pen tool basics. There are lots and lots of tutorials online about using the pen tool. The pen tool is always frustrating at first because it is a really non-intuitive way to draw. But please believe me when I say that you can learn it. Once you get through the learning curve, it's actually pretty useful. Alright, so those are some pen tool basics that I covered, and I also covered stroke and fill. You may notice right now, as I'm going through the checklist, I'm changing the fill color of my type, not the stroke color. This is just a good general type tip in Illustrator. If you change the stroke color of type, type is meant to be filled but not stroked, because the shape is all based on positive and negative. If you, I'm going to add an ugly magenta outline to this piece of type. And you can see that, well, not only does it not look very nice, it also changes the shapes of the letters. Because stroke is based on on the outline and it adds evenly to both sides of that outline, it actually distorts the letter forms. So when you are coloring type, you want to leave it with no fill, no stroke, and just change the fill color. Just a quick FYI. Now, we're finally getting to the actual assignment itself. I'm going to show you a few different ways to actually draw the letters. So the first, you can actually just go in with the pen tool and draw your shapes. Now, this is an important thing. I had my fill set to white. As I'm drawing over this, it's filling in white as I draw, but it means I can't see my background art. Your final art should actually be a solid black fill. But there's the same problem. I can't see what's underneath. Now I can, because I set up my layers well, I can turn off the art layer. Oh, so I have this on my checklist layer. I'm going to move that up to my art layer. I can turn off my art layer and compare, but you know, we don't really have quite as perfect a persistent memory as we'd like. It's hard to remember, it's hard to see. What I'd like to do when I am drawing in Illustrator over a placed scan, I like to give myself no fill and magenta stroke. So this way I can see the outline of what I'm drawing, and I can see the background through it. Okay. Now you may notice I'm not replicating my drawing exactly. I'm making lines straight where I intended them to be straight. I'm giving things a consistent angle as much as I can. I'm taking this opportunity to touch the drawing up. You know, I remarked in the last video that, you know, it becomes really apparent when you place a drawing down and start pulling guides how imperfect the drawing is. This is your you're not just perfectly replicating the drawing. You want to clean it up. You want to perfect it. I know that my vision of this particular letter style was to have things be very upright and octagonal. I am gonna move the stem of my N up a little bit. So that is one way to draw, to just grab the pen tool and go in there and start drawing. If you have very geometric shapes, you might find it very useful to use the Pathfinder palette. So that's Window, Pathfinder. I just hit it. Window, Pathfinder. This allows you to take basic geometric shapes or any shape that you can draw and do all kinds of operations with them. So let's say I have these are the vertical strokes of my O. I'm going to show you how to copy a shape. So you can just do Command C for copy, Command V for paste. That will copy a shape. Another way to do it that works in Illustrator and in InDesign is if you hold down Option, you'll see when I click on this, then I hold down Option, that my arrow is suddenly doubled. I have that little white sort of ghost arrow behind it. If I hold down Option, click something and move it, it makes a copy. So this is slightly nicer than just copying and pasting because I can control exactly where it goes. It's the same thing really, it's just a different way to handle it. And I find it very useful. I'm gonna make another copy here. I want this stroke to be a little bit thicker than my vertical strokes, but I'm going to start with this one and I'm going to rotate it. And put it where I want it. Once I generally have it where I want it, then I can change the individual points of the shape by holding down the direct selection tool. I held down Shift and grabbed two of the points at the same time. That's about the thickness I want for that. I'm going to do the same thing again to make my thin stroke, and I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees. Sorry, 90 degrees. So that I get the inverse angle. And I'm going to make this the thinness that I want. So I want this to be thinner. And now I have about the right shape. And I can copy these. Now this is where the pathfinder, I'm going to rotate again. If you hold down Shift while you use the rotate tool, it will constrain the angle of rotation to 45-degree increments, which can be nice if you just want to rotate things in a very mathematical way. So now, what do I have? I have a bunch of boxes that don't exactly overlap each other, but they're coming awfully close. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, touch up where they actually join. Actually, I'm going to leave that one be, and you'll see why in a moment. I'm going to make this one line up, right? Now here's where the Pathfinder tool comes in. This is a shape, this is a shape, 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 shape. My O is made out of 6 shapes. I want to simplify that a little bit. I want to make this angle into one shape. So if I select 2 shapes, if you select something and you hold down Shift, it will select both of them. So select, hold down Shift, select another one, go to my Pathfinder. I have all of these operations here. And this one, we have Unite, where it takes two shapes that are touching and creates a single shape out of them. This one is minus front. It takes the top shape and deletes it from the bottom. Intersect just gives you the resulting shape that is the intersection of the two shapes, and exclude is the opposite. This deletes the intersection. So this is very, very useful stuff. And then this bottom one sort of does very similar operations, but splits them, splits the parts. So I'm just going to use my unite, and I have this one single shape. And in fact, I'm going to take this guy away and use this. Rotate it. Oops. Rotate it 180 degrees by holding down the shift. Place this where I want to place it. You can keep uniting. I selected all of them and united them, and now I have, I'm going to hide the scan layer for a minute so that you can see what this actually looks like. You can see I have some weirdness here where the corners overlapped that I don't really want. So this is the corner I want. I don't want this. Actually, this is the corner I want. I want it to go like this and this. So this is where the delete anchor point tool comes in handy. I can delete that anchor point. I can delete this one. Now it's forming the corner I want it to. Delete that anchor point, delete this one. I got a little bit of a bump here, so I'm going to delete that one. In fact, I'm going to delete all the extra points that I end up with. This is a good rule of thumb of type design. You want to have the minimum number of points that you need to make the shape, no more. So it's a very good idea to go in and delete extra points if you have them. This one is a little tricky. I want it to line up with that, so I'm going to move that one down, delete that anchor point. All right. So now that's the Pathfinder tool in action. And for a typeface like this that is very, very angular, I would absolutely use the Pathfinder tool to make my shapes. Now, here's where I'm going to start doing some other tricky things. Actually, let me do one more thing with this letter shape. I don't really like the way these corners are. I'm realizing now, looking at this, that, well, even though I was going for very precise drawing, there is a little bit of roundness to my corners that I kind of like, and once I get into this digital realm, my corners are razor sharp, and it's not, you know, I feel like it's missing something. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to soften my corners a little bit. So if you have a hard corner like this, this technique is very helpful. If you use the Add Anchor Point tool and just add a point just on either side, and then you can delete the actual corner. If we zoom back out, you know, you can see that, well, that sort of cut the corner, right? It made it less sharp, but it's sort of by just simply cutting it off. But if I go back in here now with the Convert Anchor Point tool, and I just pull out the slightest curve, yeah, now I have a little bit of curve to that, and that's a little bit nicer. You can see the difference here between this ultra sharp point and this one with just a little bit of softness. Just looks a little bit nicer. So that is, I covered the pen tool, stroke fill, I covered the path. Let me show you a couple other quick Pathfinder tricks just to show you the power of what Pathfinder can do. So let's say I'm making a very, very geometric double-story A for my design. It's based very much on geometry. So much so that I'm just gonna draw the bowl with a circle. Okay? So that's about how I want the bowl of my A to be. I'm gonna stretch it just a little bit so it's an oval and not a perfect circle. The only thing is I do want to flatten it out a little bit, and I want to have a counter space. So I want to flatten out the bottom just a little bit for this design. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, overlap where I want it to be. And just for the purposes, I recommend when you're tracing, work with no fill in an outline, but just for the purposes of this, I'm gonna give these a fill. So those are my upright and horizontal strokes. This is my bowl. I'll make that yellow. And this shape that is here strictly for construction purposes, I'm going to make blue. Right? So I want to flatten out the bottom of my bowl. I place this rectangle on top of the circle. In case you're not familiar, everything in Illustrator is stacked up in an order, and it's the last thing you drew is on top of everything that you drew before it. You can adjust that order. You can select something and say bring it to front. Now that's, this yellow circle is on top of the blue. I don't want that. I want to arrange and bring the blue rectangle up to the front. I have selected the blue. I'm holding down Shift. I'm selecting the yellow. I'm going to go to my Pathfinder and shape modes. I'm going to do minus front. And that simply deletes the area of the blue rectangle from that yellow circle. I'm going to undo and do it again. All right, so I have the blue rectangle selected, I have the yellow circle selected, the blue rectangle is on top, minus front. That just subtracts that area from that shape, the top shape. I'm going to do the same thing again to make the counter of this funky geometric A. So let's say my geometric A has a diamond-shaped counter. And again, I'm going to make that blue. So right in the middle of my oval, select the bowl shape, minus front. Now I have a clear counter space in the middle. All right? And if I give this all the same fill, there's my weird geometric A that I entirely constructed. Not very attractive, but hopefully it shows you some of the techniques. All right, so that's building shapes with the Pathfinder. check this off the list. Skeletal drawing. I am going to do something that you are not going to want to do, and that is bring in one of my other sketches. So I'm going to call this scan 02. I am going to hide that. I'm going to give this also a green color. Now, you are simply not going to do this because you will have chosen one sketch and one style, but I want to show you a few different techniques that are applicable to different styles, so that all of you may take advantage. So my design number 2 is, that's okay. This is good for the skeletal drawing. This is my stencil, sort of stencil oval style. Now let's say you want to use a technique similar to our Project 1, to our skeletal letters that you learned. You may absolutely do that. That's it. That's the way a lot of type designers work, and in our the handout, that is one of the techniques for drawing type that I gave you guys. Perfectly useful technique. In which case, I would still, once again, give yourself no fill, and then I would work with a bright color. I'm going to work with yellow just to help differentiate it visually here. And you simply draw the skeletal center line. Okay? So this piece, excuse me, this design is really based on this common width and these very sort of oval strokes. So I've drawn the skeletal line for this stroke. I'm going to click outside and then click back on the pen tool to start a different shape. And I'm going to draw the bowl of our A, just the skeletal line. Now you may be asking, well, all right, that's great. I've drawn the skeletal form, but how do I get from here to there? How do I get from this center line to my finished letters? Because obviously this is not going to cut it. You want to use the stroke palette. Now, we worked a little bit with this. Up here you have a stroke color, you have a thickness, how many points you have, but I highly recommend playing with the actual stroke palette. So that would be Windows, Stroke. Here you can control how thick it is. So if I made it 6 points, that's great. You can control the end cap, that is at the end of a stroke, what that looks like. So it defaults to having a butt cap, which is going to make high school kids giggle, but what it means is that the end of the stroke is abutted to the point. You can have a round cap, which just rounds it off. The thicker your stroke, the bigger the round cap gets. And you can have a projecting cap. So as thick as your stroke is, it projects that much. I'm going to go with a round cap. Obviously, that's the closest match to this style. You also have corner styles. It defaults to a miter join, where it just makes a corner. There is a round join, which is going to be most appropriate for this style. and then there's a bevel join where it sort of cuts the corner. I'm going to go for the bevel join here. I'm going to make this 9 points. Let's make it 10 points. All right. 10 points. I'm going to apply the same thing here. Round cap, round join, 10-point stroke. Now this is starting to look a lot like the letters I had intended. Not totally, not completely, but it's a great start. And what's nice about working with the skeletal line is that I can go in here and just adjust the skeletal line very easily. Now this is a good demonstration, actually, of some proper curve technique. One of the pages of your brief had a bunch of info on proper curve technique, and one of them is this is improper curve technique, in that I have no handle on this point, and then I have handles on this middle point and no handles here. Whenever you're dealing with a curve, you generally want to set it up so that there are roughly equal handles on both sides. This will give you a much better appearance to your curves, and it will give you much better control. You also do not want, you want them to be roughly equal, the actual curve handle length that comes out. You want them to be roughly equal. So this provides a much more pleasing curve shape for us. Just that simple adjustment of having equal curves on both sides really makes a big difference in the shape, how pleasing it is to the eye. Alright, what's going on? Ah, I see. This is an easy mistake to make in Illustrator. The curves tend to double back on each other in Illustrator, and so if curve is ever behaving weirdly, that's probably why. You probably are working with a double back corner. Now, let's say I've gotten to this point with my letters. It is still not exactly what I want. It's close, but, you know, it's not exactly what I want. I want to adjust the outlines a little bit. I want this curve to be broader. I want to have a little bit of a curve on the inside. There's a bunch of little things I want to adjust. I have built my skeletal letters, but now they've only taken me so far. You can select them, go to Object Path, outline the stroke. And what that did is that turned it from the center line stroke and made whatever the thickness of the stroke was the outside of your shape. Okay, so now I can go in and I can adjust this curve to be a bit broader. For example, I can play with the inside of the curve here, make that a little bit more pleasing to me. If I want some variation of thickness, I can move those things around. All right, so that's working with a skeletal outline and then moving it into an outline if you need to. If you have a very monoline design, you may find that the skeletal drawing is just fine. Alright, so let's check that off the list. And then our last one will be the width tool. And this will be very useful for anyone who has a very calligraphic looking design. All right, so I'm going to do my scan of 3. Now, just to reiterate, you're only going to be placing the one scan. You will have only chosen one design. That's the design you're going to do. I am just placing multiple scans because I want to show you different techniques that are applicable to different styles of letters. You're not going to make this sort of mishmash Frankenfont. One of your primary goals in designing this will be to make the letters as consistent as possible with each other. Now I'm placing this last style down. I'm going to lock it. So this last style is very calligraphic. It's not like our broad edge pen. It's much more like a split nib pen where you can adjust the width. And for this, we're basically going to use that same idea of the center line at first. So the skeletal center line. So I'm drawing on my art layer. I'm going to draw this outline shape. And now I am doing, this is a great demonstration of why I recommend working with no fill and a colored stroke, because we get to this situation where I can't see what's going on. So let's go up here, no fill. Let's do a cyan stroke for this, just to differentiate when I'm working with the width tool. All right, so I am drawing my outer shape here. I'm not drawing the outer shape. Pardon me. I'm drawing the skeletal shape underneath. But because this is a very calligraphic shape, I'm going to use the stroke width tool to emulate that. So I'm starting with my very skeletal center line shape. And you will see in a minute how I'm going to get from here to here. And I have this sort of curly Q, I don't really know whether you'd call this a finial or terminal when it sort of does this, because it's tapering away, but then again you could say that it's a built-up structure. I'm going to call it a curly Q terminal, just for fun. Alright, so I have that center line. I want to draw my crossbar. I'm going to put a point here because my crossbar sort of curves upwards. And there we go. So that's a passable. I see what happened. This is a good demonstration. So I was drawing with the pen tool, and I actually brought it very close to this other point, and it assumed that I wanted to connect them. I don't actually want to connect them, so I'm going to show you how to disconnect. There's a scissors tool, and it's hiding with the eraser tool in the palette. So with the scissors, you can click on a particular point that will cut your strokes at that point. Now you can see my crossbar is a separate piece from this outline. Now, getting from here to what I've actually drawn, I'm going to use the width tool. And that is this tool. It sort of looks like a little squiggly worm. The width tool, if you this allows you to have different a stroke of varying widths. This is a relatively new tool. I think they just it just showed up in Illustrator CS5, I think, or maybe CS4. So if you have an older version that you're working with, it might not show up. So you see I pulled out a width from this endpoint because I want that part to be very wide, and it sort of ramped down the width from there. Now, that's not exactly how I want my width. I want it to go very thin at the top. I basically have a kind of a vertical stress on these letters. I want it to stay very thick in the horizontal, so I'm going to pull out a width here. I want it to get very thick again here, so I'm going to pull it out from there. And I want it to get thin again at the bottom. And again, I want it to stay a little bit thick here. So this is a really excellent tool if you have a very calligraphic approach. If you have something that looks whimsical, hand-drawn, varying widths. And what's nice about it is that it still remains a single stroke. I can still do all the things you can do with the stroke palette. You can give it different end caps, for example. I can adjust the width if I want. And it changes it all proportionally to the thicks and thins that you've declared for it. So it's nice because it gives you this combination of this calligraphic approach, but with a lot of editability. So I can make, for example, I can make the inside of my curly Q terminal a little bit wider. I can make it a little bit thinner here and sort of flare out there if that's what I want. You can control the thickness along so many axes, it's not even funny. If you want to adjust what you've already done, if you want to adjust what you've already done, that actually gets a little tricky, but it can be done. You basically want to go in and select the same points and edit their widths. So in this case, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do the same thing here with my crossbar. My crossbar is a little bit more of a consistent width. And line it up so it connects properly. Just like the last technique I showed you guys, you can also outline the stroke on this. So if you end up with a situation like this, where like, well, I want these to connect, they don't really connect, you may find it useful to sort of pull points around and put them where you want them. But you may also just find it easy to outline the path. Now the thing is that does away with all of the editability that the width tool gave you. So the width tool, very, very useful for very calligraphic ornamented. You may also find a combination of these methods to be very helpful. Meaning, you might have something where using very geometric shapes to build build up, and then switching to the width tool to make ending treatments. So for example, if you had something that was very geometric and round for your base, but then had sort of curly cues tacked on the ends, you could absolutely mix and match these. What you want to do is you want to print and perfect these. One of the great advantages of the layers is you can have the layer on when you're tracing. You can turn it off to see what it looks like without it. You should print these out. You should give them a black fill and no outline, unless you're working with the width tool, in which case you want to give it a black stroke, because your line is the shape. Print them out with crop marks and page information like I showed you. Check your printouts, go to it with the red pen. Basically, you want to have that same kind of feedback loop that you were giving yourself with the skeletal letters or the the calligraphic letters. You want to do that with printouts now. Print it out, mark it up with the red pen, go back in and adjust your paths. All right, so that's our part 2. I know this went on quite a bit. There's just a lot to cover, but that's it.